time of City of God, but now because of Bolsonaro and there's a lot of inequality and a lot of poverty in Brazil, there's a lot more violent crime now. In a lot of malls, like armed robberies, and because more and more people are. Because before, when Lula was president, he had this program called Bolsa Familia, where he would give paychecks to families according to the number of kids they would have, and there was clinics in different favelas. And now this social support disappeared, and all the Cuban doctors were expelled by Bolsonaro, by the new president. So now there's a lot more social problems in Brazil, but they're being not acknowledged by the president. He doesn't even look at it as an issue. So there's more and more violence. And actually, okay, since I began, I'll just finish the thought. Some people, some like independent journalists I know who come from, I'm not sure if they're fascists or communists, somewhere in between. They say that actually Bolsonaro is good. Why? Because he said that everyone should get a gun. So you would think that if a dictator says everyone should get a gun, he wants to give your people like power so that they won't be able to, you won't be able to impose your will against them. But I talked to a sociologist in Bahia and I asked him, what do you think about what Bolsonaro said? So he told me his perspective, that he thinks that Bolsonaro wants to have people getting guns so there could stop being chaos and then he could have a military dictatorship again. Because actually he called for military dictatorship a few times. So it's like a ploy. It's not, we shouldn't take it innocently.
It's interesting.
Well, but I don't think, that can be solution. That can be just, another, on one, from the top, that will be re-establishing of those authoritarian structures. But from the other side you will have also response. So even in, I would say, midterm, that is leading towards another conflict, in my opinion. The thing is, that with this Bolsa Familia and other programs that during Lula's and Dilma's time, they were social in sense, that they were providing money to those families that were really under the poverty line, to say, but also they were conditioning many of these social programs and social aid programs with the fact that the kids are attending school. So the attempt was to really educate, to make this social change through better education, and because Brazil is also a country which historically had strong, really high nepismenost, illiteracy. So there was attempt for that, and just one. I have that example in the book, but for you to understand how unjust society, how unjust system is through education. There are public schools and private schools, public elementary, primary schools. So the public schools are practically schools for poor ones. Everyone who is better off and wants his or her kids to make something in life will do effort to have kids in private schools. Why? Because best universities are state universities that are for free, but you have to pass entrance exam. So those kids that finished state elementary and high schools, they are, I would say, deprived of knowledge that makes possible for them to enter to good universities. So you have practically such education that is providing such knowledge that is making impossible for those kids to get out from their subordinate or dependent or however servant position in society, you know, and that is it, you know, that is one I would say very picturesque example, you know, of the nature of the system. I have this short clip, or not so short, but we don't need to watch the whole clip. It's I mentioned that yeah, after the establishment of this dictatorship, 1964, it's time, yeah, when cut happens with this cinema novo, because there were directors that were also internationally recognized and acclaimed as these Glauberosha. They become completely marginalized. It's impossible for them to do anything, and this particular kind of erotic comedy becomes genre of time. And yeah, there were like two actresses that were famous. One is this Rita Cadillac, and the other is, you will see like now. So this is clip of from different films. I will just to see to get idea of aesthetics and.
What year is this?
Well, that's 1970s, I would say, and maybe even 1980s. Some of them, you know. And the genre is called porno chanchada. Chanchada is comedy. Porno is yeah, because of it was not open porno. It's more like erotic.
Yeah,
so it's interesting also to see how this yeah, global influences were resonating in Brazil as well, because I think, you know, that they were also under influence of like Danish and Scandinavian erotic films of the era, but then it was applied in different reality. So it's interesting, yeah, that even, yeah, in time of dictatorship, in conservative, Catholic conservative country, yeah, the still sexual freedom in some way was bigger than in some other, as I think Mexico. But not only dictatorship. I think that this is more connected with culture. That Brazil was never so strictly Catholic. That Catholicism in Brazil was and still is intertwined with other influences, and there is this anthropologist Gilberto Freire that I was mentioning. He wrote that book Casa Grande is Senzala, like in English translation is Masters and Slaves. It's somehow one of these, you know, crucial, essential books explaining Brazilianness, and his thesis is that Brazil was founded that through some kind of, that practically when Portuguese, what happened when Portuguese landed and met indigenous women, particularly because there were only men in Portuguese expeditions in the very beginning and later on. It was really for a long time just the men that were coming. There were no women. And then they were encountering those indigenous people that didn't have any sexual inhibition. So women were really on disposal. So Gilberto Freire calls that situation, and he says that Brazil was founded through some kind of sexual intoxication, because these guys coming from Europe, from Inquisition, and all those restrictions in that field of life, coming and getting into that. I mean, it was
Paradise for them.
it was, yeah. That's why
Maybe.
Brazil, and there was expression in Europe about Brazil in that European Middle Ages, that there is no sin below Ecuador. That practically, yeah, that there is a famous song also by Chico Buarque, one of these singer-songwriter, to call him like that, that is still alive, that is called in that way. So, and then another thing, for this I told you that there is, that it was the biggest mortality of slaves, of black people, that was occurring in Brazil, because slave owners, masters, were really cruel, but on the other hand, on the other side, it was the biggest mixing. So what was happening? It was also for slaves, female slaves. The only possibility to improve position for social mobility, for liberation, was through, how to say, through sex, in a way, with master, and if master would, like a certain slave, and then, their position would also improve. And those female slaves needed also to be careful not to be sometimes too good, because then official wife could do certain harm. But there are also some mythical persons like Chica de Silva, was woman, black woman, that to whom the slave owner gave her all his wealth after, with testament, because she was his lover and friend, and I don't know what else, but practically she was a slave that became, in a way, master, or at least liberated herself, and also is mentioned in one popular song by, I think, Jorge Ben, Chicada, Chicada, Chicada Silva. So okay, did you have enough, or you want some
I just
more?
wanted to comment
Please.
about something interesting. An interesting phenomenon, I think, is if you compare the Portuguese colonialization to the Spanish colonization, because generally the Portuguese, from what Brazilians told me, were a lot softer in how they colonized than the Spanish. The Spanish were generally a lot more cruel. The Portuguese generally like to find not fair, but agreements where kind of both sides will get something, and they weren't as forceful and as one-sided, and therefore, as a result, also that created a whole Brazilian consciousness of not really being that rebellious in general, but of trying to appease, which is very strong Brazilian mentality. And also, if you look at the resistance to the dictatorship, and like the number of killed in Brazil, if you compare it to other countries like Chile, Argentina, was much far fewer.
Yeah.
And the way the resistance was in Brazil was relatively less militant. I mean, it was militant, but not as much. So, like for example, in Argentina, a lot more people disappeared than in Brazil. So at the same time, Brazil did torture. They tortured pretty badly the prisoners, and it was very cruel. Like, I'm not saying it was soft, but if you compare
it is much less, and it is much less. It's uncomparable, really, with Chile and Argentina. With Argentina, it's like much more people and were killed over there, and that. The whole method of governing was different.
By the way, just speaking of Chile, I have to interrupt. Yeah, I'm sorry. Continue.
But Chile and Argentina, okay, in different ways, but I would say in both, people were disappearing. A lot of people were disappearing. A lot of people were murdered. In Brazil, I don't want to. How to say? Negate the victims, the number of victims, and but it's still like much less, and it's not possible to compare directly with Argentina and Chile. Yeah, and I agree with that, and I agree also with what you said. Talking of, okay, you can say that there is like historical background. Long historical background for the certain pattern in behavior and managing conflicts or managing society, and you can see that in this whole media managing the situation, or mass media, how they function through genres, through this telenovela that I mentioned slightly, but it was practically television in Brazil was installed and supported by dictatorship, because it's time, early 60s, so military dictatorship was how to say, was giving subventions to citizens to buy